My name is Melody Stanford Martin. I'm the author of this book that just came out a couple of months ago, Brave Talk, Building Resilient Relationships in the Face of Conflict. So this topic is right up my alley. This book is an outflow of my graduate work in conflict transformation at Boston University. And it's also an outflow of my personal experience with conflict with people I love over the last 10, 15 years, having very different views on politics and religion and finding a lot of pain and a lot of struggle in those differences. And so this is really a culmination of what I've learned. And I'm glad you're here to be part of this conversation, because I think everyone who has read this has told me this is one of the most timely books they've read in a while. And I'm laughing just because I could not have anticipated when I started writing it 3 years ago that, again, this would be what we need right now. And it's both bittersweet and wonderful to be able to bring this work to the world, right? So healthier disagreement is what we're talking about today. Quick disclaimer: this conversation presumes that you want to stay in relationship with the people you disagree with, and that it's safe for you to do so. So I am not advocating for anyone to put themselves in harm's way. I'm not advocating for emotional or physical unsafety in situations of abuse. If that is something you're going through, I highly recommend that you be in touch with a healthcare helping professional immediately to try to work through that situation. I am not a licensed therapist, but I can give advice on other kinds of conflicts that are not immediately harmful. So let's start with this. I would love to hear from each of you as you're comfortable sharing. What brings you to this particular conversation? Would anyone like to share?
Mel, it's Hall. I'm going to echo what you said about family. And those are folks I do want to maintain a relationship with, but I have struggled with polar opposite opinions, especially in the political realm.
Yes, I resonate with that deeply. Anyone else would like to share what brings you to this conversation? Also, welcome, Crystal. I saw you just came in. Welcome.
I would just say that in general, I just think these are really good skill sets to have if you can talk to people, because it's not easy, I know that, and find ways to overcome disagreements enough to converse about the topic, and maybe come to some agreement at some point. I don't know, but it struck me as very timely and intrigued me.
It is a good skill set to have, and it really strikes me that as humanities are more and more being maybe taken out of school systems, or especially K through 12, a lot of us don't get these skills unless we go out of our way to learn them, or we learn them at home kind of by accident, right? When do you learn how to disagree or have healthy discourse with people in our education system or in life? So I'm glad you said that. And to that point, we're also in such an age of deep polarization right now. And there are many forces at work in that. But I think we all feel the pressure of that, right? We all feel it. Yeah. Anyone else would like to share what brings you to this conversation? No problem. There will be more chances to interact. All right, so let's start with this. A lot of people have never given a lot of critical thought to their relationship with conflict or disagreement. And all of us have a relationship to it. And a lot of it times it comes from our family systems. It comes from what has been modeled to us through leaders and teachers throughout our lives. It comes to us through, our histories with relationships and even our past traumas. And there's so much wrapped into it. But if you could maybe take a look at the list that I've collected on the right, maybe you could even think of more styles of disagreement. Some of us are avoidant. That's probably my defining characteristic. Before I got some skills in this way, I would just want to run away when things got heated. Avoidance. There's brawlers, people who like the fight, kind of put them up, get your dukes up, let's throw down, right? There's people who are conciliators, which I mean in kind of a negative sense. Not that any one of these are necessarily that much better than the others, but conciliators are people who rush to fix it, who rush to get a resolution before it's time or before things have really been properly sussed out, right? Debaters, you know, we all know a good debater who just loves to wield their intellectual prowess. Maybe they were on debate team, they have some debate skills that they've learned, and they can really work their way around an argument. And then there are devil's advocates, right? Who just, there's always one in the room. I just want to play devil's advocate. And, you know, just disagree to disagree, which can be good or bad, you know? And then there's a final category that I like to call cooperatives. And this for me is more of the goal for myself and what I recommend for others. That cooperatives seek to bring disagreements from a place of antagonism to saying, okay, we disagree, but how can we still work together? We disagree, but how can we still respect each other? We disagree, but what can we agree on? How can we cooperate and move forward together, right? So cooperatives tend to let things air out, talk things out, right? Get the truth out, air out the dirty laundry, get the skeletons out of the closet, whatever you want to say. So as you're looking through this list, maybe reflect, take a moment to reflect on what your go-to style is, because I think a lot of us have one, or maybe we might bounce between two styles. And then I want to ask you, you know, what styles are better and worse for community? If we're talking about community, like building community, having strong community, strong relationships, what's best for community, right? As someone who's a classic avoidant, I can recognize that might be my default mode. That might be what I learned because my family was very conflict avoidant. You know, my dad, like, God bless him, he didn't like yelling. So anytime we would raise our voices, he would say, stop yelling and stop talking, right? Just go to your room and stop, right? So we never really got a chance to learn to really duke things out. So anyway, it's a good thing to know where you're coming from and to know where you want to go. Let me offer this. We need disagreement to be healthy people. And this is not a popular opinion, but it's something that I believe very strongly, that I devoted an entire chapter in my book to. Disagreement makes our ideas stronger. It makes our relationships stronger, our communities stronger, and our democracy stronger. Without disagreement, without the healthy process of challenging and sharpening each other, we have groupthink, we have monopolies. You know, think about the lack of disagreement and diversity. Even if someone eats only the same food, you can't survive. If an ecosystem only has one species, it can't survive. The fabric of our life here on Earth is designed for diversity and disagreement. And without it, we are not healthy people. Without it, our ideas are not healthy. So I think a lot of us are afraid naturally of disagreement, and I certainly would be in this boat naturally. But when I started to reframe my thinking that disagreement actually is not only healthy, but it's really when someone takes the time to disagree with me well, and they take the time to see me, and they take time out of their busy day, not to attack me or not to run away, but say, hey, I'm going to challenge you in this way. They're giving me a gift. And when I can start thinking about it that way, everything changes for me in this. I was having I think I put something on Facebook. It was on Facebook of a couple of years ago. I said something like, dissent is patriotic. So it's a post about disagreement, right? And a friend of mine who works in Honduras got up and said, well, that's a really privileged thing to say, and disagreed with me. And I got so mad at her. I guess, like, wow, I was being so profound, and you just came along and you know, knocked down my stack of toys. And instead of railing her out or lambasting her, what I started my response was the phrase, thank you for disagreeing with me. And I thought, that sounds so strange to say that to someone. I've never heard many people say that before. Thank you for disagreeing. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, you know what? I really wish that we as a society would start seeing the gift in that, would start seeing the profoundness in that beauty, that magic when someone disagrees with us well. They're giving us a chance to sharpen ourselves, to talk more about our ideas. That's a positive thing. And I think if we can reframe, oh, disagreement's scary, to disagreement can be a gift, then it changes everything. So as we all are all aware, there is in the world, there are unhealthy disagreements and healthy disagreements, right? Unhealthy disagreements. Anytime you're using cruelty or domination or threatening human rights and dignity, or you're arguing about those things, right? If someone comes up and says, you know, I believe that all Black people should be kicked out of the country, right? That is an unhealthy argument that should not be engaged. You're not going to sit there and debate, you know, well, I disagree with you, but your opinion's also valid, right? That's not a valid opinion because it's not respecting someone's human rights, right? So that would be considered, in my opinion, an unhealthy disagreement. And on the other hand, there are healthy disagreements, right? Differences of opinion, but disagreements that are cooperative, that share power, that protect human rights and dignity. Where it gets sticky, and again, because healthy disagreements often, the easy disagreements, right? Well, I want Taco Bell and you want Burger King. That's not a hard disagreement to navigate, right? What gets really difficult is when you have this gray space, this gray area between healthy and unhealthy disagreement, where there's not consensus about what constitutes cruelty, right? If one party thinks that saying racial slurs as a joke is funny and not mean and hurtful, and the other party is triggered and traumatized by that, then there's not a consensus about what that cruelty should be and look like. And you can't even have a conversation, because really those people are speaking two different languages, right? When there's not a consensus about use of power, when there's not a consensus about human rights and dignity. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot in our current moment as an American people. We have different sets of values, different really languages that we're speaking, and it's almost difficult even to have the disagreement conversation, let alone to do it in a healthy way. So just something to be aware of, just something to draw your attention to. Now, what I've been seeing a lot on the left, as someone who is very liberal, right, but who has a lot of conservative friends and tries to be in conversation with people across the political spectrum, what I've noticed in the last 10 years or so is a trend in progressive spaces in particular to police the thoughts and speech of others. And in many ways, I understand why that happens, because there's this push towards social justice, right? But it's caused a lot of resentment from my read on the political situation. So I wanted to create a thought experiment that would help people suss out when an idea should be entertained and tolerated versus when an idea should not be entertained and tolerated. When an idea should be in the realm of healthy disagreement, and when an idea should be considered in the realm of unhealthy disagreement and something we don't want to engage. Does that make sense? Is everyone following?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the thought experiment. Let's say the world of ideas is like a giant potluck. Everyone brings their dish, their idea, to the potluck. We all share ideas, taste each other's ideas, say, oh, I really like that one. That one doesn't taste good to me, right? And we have this mass exchange. Great, right? Diversity, yay. That part's easy, right? Everyone tolerates, everyone has a nice time. What happens when someone brings dog poo? I know this sounds ridiculous. This thought experiment is in my book. My publisher's like, are you sure you want to write about dog poo? I said, yes, this is the best way I can explain this. What happens if someone brings dog poo to that potluck and tries to pass it off as food? Because we know in this day and age of media consumption, there are people, there are trolls, there are malicious people out there who want to bring ideas that are harmful for human consumption and pass them off as fine, as safe, right? So what happens when someone brings dog poo to the potluck? Obviously, we have to take it off the table before someone gets hurt. We have to. We're obligated to, in order to keep our community healthy, right? Okay, that's the first part of the thought experiment. The second part is this. What happens if little Timmy brings his grandma's meatloaf to the potluck, but people mistake it for dog poo and treat him as if he's trying to do something malicious, when all he's doing is bringing his traditional, time-honored dish that he grew up with and loves. And instead of saying, okay, you know, you can stay at the table, we're just not going to eat your dish, but you can be here, we give him the boot and we say, get out of here, and we dump his food in the trash. What does that do to him? What does that do to his psyche, to his emotional health? What does that do to his sense of community? Will he ever feel comfortable coming back to that potluck again? Or will he probably double down on his ideas? Will he probably double down and say, well, I don't want any part of this. I'm going to go, you know, find people who will accept me. In my opinion, and this is a very complicated situation and there are a lot of forces at work, but I think that some of the radicalization we're seeing today is because of this dynamic of shaming people who are on a learning curve, right? So I'll just say that in general. So what are the characteristics that we can look for when someone brings a questionable idea to the potluck of ideas, okay? There are 5 questions we can ask ourselves. Number 1, can this idea be supported? If it's wildly false, it doesn't belong on the table. It's not safe information, okay? If you're not sure, explore its truth claims. If this idea can be supported, it is food. Maybe it's made with low quality ingredients, low quality sources, but it's still valid. Even if you don't like it or you don't disagree with it, it needs to stay on the table for the sake of free speech, right? Next idea, is this idea relevant? If it's not, if someone's using this idea to intentionally distract or mislead, we need to consider taking it off the table. If it is relevant, you know, maybe it doesn't fit the party theme, but it's still edible. We need to leave it on the table. You don't have to eat it. You don't have to agree with it, but it can still be there, right? Is this idea well-meaning? Does it resist harm? If no, it's poo. Get it out of there. If yes, if it is well-meaning, maybe it's an idea you hate, but it deserves a place at the table, right? Does it share power? Is the next question. If it justifies inequality, get it out. We have to draw a line in the sand at some things in this world, right? If it does share power, you don't have to eat it if you don't like it, again, but you shouldn't shame the person who brought it because they probably mean well, right? And it finally is the person who brought it trustworthy. What does their credibility have? What stake do they have in the community? Are they trying to be misleading and malicious, or are they trying to do the right thing? Are they trying to do the right thing by the community? So let me offer that if the dish has been designated as something that is harmful for human consumption, if that is not an idea that we should encourage or tolerate, we can remove the dish from the table and set healthy boundaries with the guest, right? We don't have to treat the guest like garbage or dehumanize them because they brought a dish that's not healthy, right? So I think for me, this thought experiment does 2 things. It really puts limits around what we accept and what we don't accept, what we tolerate and what we don't accept, what we don't tolerate. It helps us understand where to draw the line in the sand and to err on the side of generosity, if at all possible. And 2, it really reminds us to separate the idea from the person in a lot of ways, meaning that just because we reject an idea doesn't mean we necessarily have to reject and shame and dehumanize the person. That we can model radical humanization in the way that we interact, even with ideas that we think are harmful. So this is challenging. These are challenging thoughts that even to me challenge the ways that my party, my team does things, our rhetoric, you know. I want to encourage people to think more critically about the ways that they are responding to even criticism, right? So here are the 5 ideas again. So I've been asking myself in the last few days even, what does it mean to be a worthy opponent? What does it mean to be a worthy opponent, right? Because if we're shifting our thinking from disagreement is bad, get rid of it, to disagreement can be a gift when it's healthy disagreement, then we're really shifting this focus from someone who disagrees with me is not my enemy, but can be a worthy opponent. A worthy opponent chooses to show dignity, chooses to, even if the situation doesn't even warrant it, right? Tries to show dignity and respect. A worthy opponent has a goal of mutual edification and education. A worthy opponent fights fair with credibility, and a worthy opponent gets credit where it's due. A worthy opponent does not seek to dominate or control the other person. They seek to challenge and sharpen them, but not to dominate or control. A worthy opponent does not use personal attacks. This is a big one recently, right? Because we live in such a sensational media age that I hear personal attacks flying every which way all the time. It's not healthy to disagree in that way. It's not healthy for us. It breaks down the fabric of our community, the fabric of our society, of our democracy. A worthy opponent does not misrepresent their opponent's argument, either intentionally or unintentionally. They pay attention to nuance. A worthy opponent does not perpetuate misinformation, and a worthy opponent does not jump to conclusions. A worthy opponent seeks to give the benefit of the doubt. So I'd love to hear from you all. Has there ever been a time in your life when you have been able to be a worthy opponent to someone, or someone has been a worthy opponent to you? Any thoughts on this?
I feel like certainly there has been a time, but it's not jumping out at me. I think the latest things going on in the news have just, I don't know, overcome everything else.
Yeah.
Made it difficult to think back. I don't feel like it's always been this bad.
Yeah, I agree with you that it doesn't feel like it's always been this bad. I just saw a snippet from a biography about Obama inviting all the former living presidents to the White House and asking them for advice and asking for basically their blessing in his new role. And George W. in particular saying, we want you to succeed. We have a common goal of serving the Republic. We are all Americans. We're going to give you the best advice we can give you. You know, this sense of, again, I think that's a perfect picture of a worthy opponent. Someone who's, you know, I disagree with you on so many things, but I still want the best for you because I want the best for our greater common goal. And we as a people have lost sight of that in so many ways. So I'm with you on that idea that everything that's happened recently has seemed to just far overshadow. It's hard to think past the last week, right? Yeah.
I would also echo that. I was trying to think of a good example, and I currently work in travel. Prior to my work in travel, I was working in healthcare policy and advocacy and working to pass health reform at the state level. And we had lots of difficult conversations and debates, but I feel like with folks across the aisle, it was always getting to this common ground up until 4 years ago. And then it turned into personal attacks and, just everything you talked about in your last slide about not, having worthy opponents. And that's, frankly, when I left that world and switched to the travel industry, where it was just a lot less combative and it was, a lot more harmonious, and it felt like people were getting somewhere. So I had to go pretty far back for that example.
Yeah, and that gridlock is very stressful, especially over a long period of time. I really resonate with that. It's exhausting to constantly not be able to get anywhere because everyone's just dug their trenches. I don't have a slide for this, but in my book, I wrote about an analogy that I created called the fear bunker. It's the place where we go when we're afraid, when we're threatened, right? So we go in there, we're all alone, and we're just launching missiles at each other. And it takes a lot of work to coax someone out of their fear bunker and to stay out of it yourself. Because once you're in there, conversation stops, right? Let me see if I can find the little illustration, because there's a little diagram in the book. Can you see that? That's the fear bunker. Once you're in there, the conversation stops, right? And kind of just anxiety takes over, you're in fight or flight mode. So I think in order to have healthier disagreement, a big thing we can do is just stay out of our fear bunker. Just try to work on emotional regulation and realize that this is a process. You're not going to get somewhere in a single day, right? We have to stop thinking through terms of fear. Just if I don't do this, oh, the entire world is going to fall apart. And just this catastrophizing sort of thinking, and to draw someone into conversation and into community, and to really see them and invite them to stay out of their fear bunker. Okay, let's stay out of that place that we're in together, right? And let's try to not let fear overpower us and actually have a conversation. That's become increasingly impossible for many of us, and it's really hard to do that. This slide brings up for me this one conversation I had a few years back with, so I'm divorced, and with one of my ex's family members, who is very conservative, and she did me the great honor. I still think of this as just an absolute honor to patiently and with great detail and nuance engage me in the topic of abortion through a Facebook thread. And it was a very, very hard conversation, both the emotional aspect of me engaging with, you know, my ex's family member who I used to be very close to and love, but also to talk about this really emotional topic. And we had this exchange that was so deep, and I feel like really she led me in this, like the tone that she struck and saying, you know, and communicating her respect of me, and that she, you know, she appreciated the conversation. I had other people messaging me saying, I was reading this thread going, nobody talks to each other like this. Like, how did you guys do this? And I still to this day, you know, again, it goes back to this collaboration. Both parties have to want to do that for each other. Both parties have to want to give that gift of healthy disagreement for it to work. It can't just be on one side, right? Because other times what happens if it's just on one side is that side gets taken advantage of, or that one side is asked to give up too much, right? If one side is gridlocked and dug in their trenches and launching missiles, and the other side is trying to strike peace and healthy disagreement, a lot of times the side that's gearing for peace is kind of left vulnerable, right? So it really does have to be a meeting of minds in the middle. One of the works that has deeply impressed me and inspired me in this journey is the book Dignity by Dr. Donna Hicks. She's an international conflict mediator at Harvard. And she works with world leaders who are absolutely embroiled in horrible conflicts, global conflicts. And in her book, Dignity, she writes about how her methodology really, first and foremost, before addressing any of the issues, is to bring people together and just get them to recognize each other's human dignity. You are a human being before we're going to talk about issues. You are a human being before anything else. And she said that alone, reframing that relationship between two parties, is really profound. And it gets people so much farther, because people have to see each other's humanity, and reckon with each other's humanity, and come to a place of collaboration instead of antagonism, right? So it really is, the more I do this work, the more I realize it's not even a list of to-dos, it's a mindset, it's a posturing. And if we can figure that out, then other stuff starts to fall in line. So having said that, I'm going to give you some tips, some tips and advice that hopefully may help you. You know, things, just little tricks that I've learned along the way. In addition to that bigger mindset of thinking about disagreement as a set of opportunities, as a set of gifts that we can give someone else. So before you disagree with someone, it can be very helpful to name the disagreement, right? We disagree for 100,000 different reasons. So sometimes it's really helpful to understand what we're disagreeing about. Are we disagreeing about religious beliefs? Are we disagreeing about the nature of facts versus alternative facts, right? Are we disagreeing about policies and rules? Maybe we're disagreeing about values, or maybe we're disagreeing about the meaning of the word is semantics. What happens a lot of times in conflicts that are extremely difficult to overcome, disagreements are about resources and scarcity. I want the apple, you want the apple. What do we do about it, right? Once you name the disagreement, you can figure out exactly what you're disagreeing about, if you can, ahead of time. Maybe you figure that out during the course of the conversation. Next, you can start to frame the disagreement. Importantly, again, going back to that idea of recognizing the human dignity of the other person. What is my relationship to this person? Who are they to me? Are they my enemy? Are they my neighbor? Are they my loved one? Who are they to me, right? And then, and once you've reminded yourself of that, and maybe even go through this process with that person, next you can ask, what is the history of the disagreement between us? Has it been healthy? Has it been unhealthy? Has it been gray area? Because a lot of times when we have had a history of unhealthy disagreement with someone, even if we walk into a new situation with them, we remember that history, we remember that pain that has been there in the past. And it's really hard not to bring that into the new situation. It's almost inevitable, right? So thinking about what the patterns have been, and then where would you like to go, right? What are the goals? How would you like to rethink this relationship? How would you like to grow in the relationship? And you might not know how to get there, but at least envisioning it. You know, I would like to be able to talk for 20 minutes with you about politics without screaming. If that's the goal, you might not even know how to do that, but to just have that in mind. What are my emotional stakes in the issue? It's a huge part of this. My emotional stakes. What are my emotions doing inside? And a lot of times what I will do when I'm arguing with someone, I'll take a little assessment and be like, you know what? I'll talk to myself and say, wow, I'm feeling really mad right now. There it is. My anger is just going roar. And a lot of times just like recognizing that can help us let it not get the better of us, right? Not always. It's not that simple, but it can help us name that and frame it, right? And then finally, what do I hope or expect to get out of this conversation? And let me offer, in all of my years doing this work, it's very rare to get someone to change their mind. It's very rare. So I think sometimes it sounds strange, but lowering our expectations for conversion and upping our expectations for strengthening the relationship and strengthening our community is probably a good idea in most cases. Along those lines, it's very, very important to focus on seeing instead of winning, right? Unless you're in a formal debate setting and you have agreed that there are going to be deliberations and you're going to pick a winner. In most cases, if you're just having a conversation, it really shouldn't be about winning. It should be about educating. It should be about seeing that person, seeing them. For me, and maybe people have different definitions of this, seeing someone means really understanding the person's heart, worries, fears. If they're in their fear bunker, why are they in there? What do they love? What is the meaning beneath their words? What do they ultimately want? What's their vision for the world? Seeing is better for community than winning, because winning is a power struggle. Winning often means that we go into attack mode instead of trying to really understand. And I will say this, it's very difficult to try to see someone when they are espousing ideas that are dog poo at the table, right? If that person is saying, no, we really should promote inequality. We really should promote this idea that is absolutely harmful, right? This advice has limits, right? I'm not telling you to dehumanize them, but you also don't want to, you want to be cautious about extending too much empathy towards someone who has malicious intent, right? But for most people in most situations, when you take the lead and choose to see someone, you can ask them in turn to see you. We have this cultural value of reciprocity in American culture, that when I give you a gift, you feel somewhat obligated to return the favor, right? If I watch your dog, you might feel somewhat obligated to do something nice for me in return. And so not to advocate being manipulative, but when you take the lead and choose to see someone, you can ask them, you can invite them to see you as well. This process is called radical humanization, and it is an antidote to the polarization that has just taken over our country, right? And I have to say, it's one of the most difficult things you can do. You know, as I, in my very liberal ideology, sit down and take the time to really see someone who believes things that I really hate, but remembering that the person is more important than the idea. If you really want to radically humanize those around you and really show love and show courage to say you are a human being before anything else, your dignity is the most important thing. Me being in community with you is the most important thing. Unless I've made a strategic and an ethical decision to cut off community with you because you are no longer a safe human being for me to interact with, I'm going to try to recognize your humanity. A note here about brave space versus safe space. A few years ago, it was kind of all the rage to, we need to create safe spaces where no one gets traumatized, no one gets triggered. And those spaces are important, but the world doesn't always work that way. We can't always make sure no one ever gets hurt by any words that are said, right? So in the last few years, educators, there's actually an article that was published called Brave Space. We can define this as saying hard things with courage, right? We're not trying to intentionally be unsafe, but we're not necessarily going to coddle people or hold people's hand, right? Sometimes there are just some things in life that require awkward conversations and difficult conversations, right? Especially when you're doing work like confronting white supremacy or confronting oppression. Sometimes that's not going to make the person being confronted feel safe or feel comfortable, but it's still important work nonetheless, right? So I think it can be important to designate with the person you're going to be speaking to. Safe spaces are important, but we're not doing that right now. We're not creating a safe space. We're going to create a brave space where we can tell some truth, right? And we're not going to be mean, but we're going to be brave, right? Why are brave spaces important? Sometimes we need to be willing to get uncomfortable for each other, right? That's part of being in community. I care about you enough to be uncomfortable for you in a healthy way, right? We're not going to be unsafe, but we need to be able to speak truth without being terrified of hurting someone's feelings all the time. And I will say also too, that people who are traditionally and socially more in positions of power need to work more on being open and receptive to being brave, to challenging fragility and challenging the weaponizing of tears and saying, you know what, this might hurt to hear. This might make me very physically uncomfortable. This might make me want to run away, but I'm an adult and it's time to face this material, right? This information, this conversation. Another thing you can do is agree to disagree beforehand. This is an article I wrote in Psychology Today a couple of months ago. This is a tactic, this is a strategy that's worked very well for myself and loved ones who disagree fundamentally. And we have come to the realization that we are at a total impasse and we probably will never change each other's mind. And in the past, when we've gotten into these conversations, it's just gone nuclear, like not speaking to each other for months, horrible disagreements, right? And what has helped immensely for me and for others that I worked with to agree to disagree beforehand, going into the conversation, we are going to not force each other to agree, right? We're going to decide ahead of time not to change each other's minds. We're just going to educate each other and hear each other out, and that's going to be it. And it sounds really wild, but here's what it does. It makes space for people to be where they are and to know what they know. It lowers animosity, which can in turn increase curiosity, right? If I know that you're not going to be hell-bent on changing my mind, then I can relax and I can actually listen to what you have to say because I'm not in my fear bunker warding you off. Agreeing to disagree ahead of time gives you the chance to set ground rules. It makes space for people to change their mind without shame because there's no win or loss. There's not going to be someone sitting in the corner going, I told you so. Nobody likes that, right? But if you're having a conversation where you've already agreed that you're not going to try to pressure each other or to control each other to change, then if someone says something that's like, wow, I never thought about it that way, you might have changed my mind, and they can go, okay, we were never here to win over each other. We were never here to exert control in the first place. What it also means is that people have agreed ahead of time not to try to control you. So this is a great way to begin a process of collaboration and exchange of ideas without domination or control. Any questions so far? I've been talking quite a lot. Any questions or comments anyone wants to throw in? Pieces of advice, what's worked for you before walking into these conversations? No problem, we can continue. All right, while the disagreement is happening, okay, so all that was before you disagree, the framing, the posturing. While you disagree, persuade, don't seek to control. This is very interesting that I learned in my research for my book. When we are yelled at, when we are screamed at, our bodies surge with stress hormones that actually neurologically inhibit learning new information. This is actually, a lot of this research came up through studies of food insecurity in children, that the toxic stress of living with food insecurity on a day-to-day basis lowered test scores, not even from a nutritional perspective, but because that stress, just the presence of those stress hormones constantly made it difficult to pay attention. And it's the same, it's very similar at least, with difficult conversations. When someone's screaming at me, it's very hard for me physiologically, neurologically, to actually hear them out and absorb that information. And again, people will have different tolerance levels of this, right? You might have a pretty high tolerance for yelling, and someone can be cussing you out and you can really still engage, but there are also people who might have a really low tolerance. So I don't say this to tone police, because I do believe that people should express themselves and not be inhibited by just always having to talk nice. But what I mean to say is that when we are trying to force someone or control someone or scream at someone, it's probably not effective, and it might make us feel better, but it's not changing the situation. Probably not, right? There's a theory in psychology called reactance. Sometimes it's known as the backfire effect, but reactance is when people's ideological options are limited, they will often dig in their heels. For example, if you have an array of Skittles on the table and you tell someone they're only allowed to eat the green one, in their mind, they're probably going to go, I want all the Skittles. Why can't I have all the Skittles? I'm going to get all the Skittles. It's human nature, right? You could also maybe consider it the forbidden fruit. So when you're talking to someone and you tell them you're only allowed to eat my potluck dish, you're only allowed to believe my idea, reactance often kicks in and people will dig in their heels for being in opposition, because people love free will, right? Nobody wants to be controlled. So it's something to keep in mind when you're talking to someone. It's a great idea to say, hey, what about this idea? This is a really tasty, wonderful idea. Check this idea out. Maybe you'll like it. Instead of saying, this is the only food you're allowed to eat. One will probably get a much better response. Using domination perpetuates domination. Chapter 3 of my book, I don't mean to make this a giant infomercial about my book. It's just this topic has so much to do with what I've written about. There's a whole chapter on domination and power studies, and I recommend it because it's helpful in understanding how systems of oppression and domination are linked together. So the opposite of dominating, controlling, oppressing is sharing power, right? And it is possible to share power and to come to a situation as equals with someone you disagree with and to try to navigate and wrestle, right? Instead of trying to overpower. Making strong ethical arguments also combats the cycle of misinformation and conspiracy theories, right? So when you're taking the time to have strong persuasion and ethical rhetoric, you could say, when you're resisting the urge to control, you're resisting the urge to be violent in your words, you're doing a lot more than just being a good person. You know, you're encouraging healthy disagreement, you're encouraging healthy rhetoric, you're strengthening community, you're making sure people know that they have freedom, that they're safe, right? There's a lot going on there that makes it, I think, our responsibility to work to converse in these ways. We talked a bit about emotional regulation, understanding how our emotions work. In my framework, there are two rivers of emotion. One is our self-protection river, the fight or flight response. That's a fast response. And then a lot of times underneath it, there's a slower current, the second river, our meaning-making river, our grievability. And I think it's really important to understand that you might be talking to someone and they're really getting keyed up, right? They're getting fight or flight, they're ready to go. But underneath it, there might be this much slower current of grief that the world is not as it should be, that the relationship is not as it should be, that the loss of dreams, the loss of hope, right? There's a lot of layers going on in these emotional planes, both in ourselves and in the person we're speaking with. And it can be really important to remember that if someone's getting keyed up or having an emotional response, it could be so many things. It could be these levels of emotions. It could be trauma. It could be so many things. So just, to me, it's a reminder to be gentle with ourselves and with others in those emotions. A helpful tool is to use I speak instead of all speak. I instead of everyone in the world. The way I see it, not this is the way it is. Right? So resist the urge to make grand sweeping statements. Speak from your personal experience because your story is powerful. The ideas that matter to us, they're not just these disembodied theories. They impact our personal lives. So I think it's important to bring it back to, how do these beliefs take form in everyday people? How does this impact me? How does this impact you? How does this impact people I love, right? Instead of just intellectualizing all the time. So using language like I feel, in my opinion, the way I see it from what I've read, maintains a level of a posturing of communicating to this other person that you don't know everything, but you have a conviction. It can be a really powerful thing to use I speak instead of all speak. Another thing that I've seen a lot is people calling out, you can't say that way. Again, reactants, right? Calling out or shaming. And there is a place for shame in our rhetoric. I think, it is an important tool in extreme cases, but a really helpful dynamic tool that's come out recently. And I've seen this a lot in Black feminist activists in particular, to invite people in, not calling them out, right? Call out in cancel culture can be important tools at our disposal, but they can be toxic in our individual relationships. So if someone says something that offends you or that you find offensive, consider whether shame is necessary. A lot of times the thing that they're saying is not just the words that they're saying, it's an entire way that they think, right? And you're not going to correct or fix, quote unquote, or change the way that they think as an entire framework in a single 2-minute exchange, right? A lot of times it just causes resentment. So taking the time to be an educator as much as possible. You might take the person aside privately, respectfully, if it makes sense to do so. If not, maybe a more public address is necessary. But in that exchange, you might share how their use of the offensive term made you feel, right? Coming back to I speak, maybe offer a better way to say it. Hey, instead of saying this slur, maybe you can say this, because that's not really, that's actually, that term's kind of considered offensive. So maybe this would you please use this instead, please? And then tell them how much it means to you when they make an effort to change. Right? And this is difficult, and I say this, this in particular comes from a place for me as a white person of pretty immense privilege, because I haven't had this lifelong struggle of being the primary person at stake in the danger that words can pose to me so much. So I would say this cautiously. I would never see a person of color calling someone out and try to correct them and say, oh, you should be nicer. That is not my intent with this. My intent is to say that we can get creative with the ways that we interact and the ways that we ask people to change their rhetoric. And then finally, paying attention to nuance, right? The world is not black and white. There are all kinds of shades of color and nuance to every perspective. It is possible to disagree with someone partly, with qualifications. Hey, I disagree. I like that one thing you said. I like that. Let's talk about that. Or I like that one thing you said, but here's a different way to see it, right? It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And I think that's where we've gotten into this gridlock, this polarization. I have to accept all of your argument or none at all, right? But it's very powerful to give someone credits where it's due, right? To say, hey, you made a good point there, because it shows that you're not hell-bent on attacking them. And it shows goodwill and it builds trust. That is what it means to be a collaborator, right? In disagreement. When you extend this favor, also you model and set the tone for your conversation partner to possibly do the same. That ethic of reciprocity. So when we take the time to really understand our partner's argument, when we take the time to say, you know what, that particular thing, I do agree with you on that. Wow, look, that's common ground. But here's why you're wrong in these other ways, right? It shows that you're not just trying to take them out, you're trying to arrive at greater truth. And then after you disagree, after the conversation, remember to re-up the conversation, re-up the relationship. Remember to tell that person how much they matter to you. Thank them for disagreeing. Thank them for taking the time. Acknowledge the hard work you've done together. This is something I've had to learn the hard way. But this is one of the only things that has saved my relationship with some of my friends and family. After we duke it out for 2 hours, I say, you know, I'm so mad at you. I'll actually tell them, I'm so mad at you right now, but I really appreciate this conversation. I appreciate you challenging me. I appreciate you taking the time and not walking away. I appreciate that we can have a resilient relationship that can bounce back after conflict and not break. That means so much to me. Let them know you appreciate the chance to create a brave space with them. Tell them if you learned something from them. You know, I didn't know that fact about this. Thank you for telling me. I don't know everything. I'm the first to admit it. Let them know if you're open to revisiting the conversation. Maybe make a plan together for further action. There's this really wonderful project called Hands Across the Hills that's been going on in the last couple of years. These liberal New Englanders decided to make this really unusual friendship with this coal mine. I think it's a coal mining town in Kentucky. You can go, if you look it up, handsacrossthehills.org or .com. And they decided that they were going to just talk and have these conversations where they come together and just talk about hard things. And they realized that they actually have more in common than they thought. They just built this really incredible relationship. And now, after having these kind of summits where they would just get together and just get to know each other, they just wanted to get to know each other. They wanted to build bridges, despite all odds, right? Despite geographic odds, political odds, religious odds. They've developed these great relationships with each other, even though they haven't really changed each other's mind. But what they have been able to do is develop some initiatives. Like I think they're working on like gun responsibility. They've decided to come together and like find something that they can work on together. And I think it's just so beautiful that they can do that. It's so funny and so unusual, but you know, the world right now needs more of that kind of work. So maybe after you have this stark disagreement with somebody, maybe you can say, you know what, there's one thing that we do agree on. Maybe we can do something about that. Maybe we can make a plan for that and work together on that. And then finally, understanding that resolution may never be possible with this person. You may never resolve this disagreement. You probably won't. That's just the truth of it, right? In all my writing and work on impasse, I thought that was actually one of the things that happened in my graduate studies. I went to the professor running the conflict transformation program, who's a lawyer and a mediator and a minister, wonderful guy named Tom Porter. And I said, hey, all the case studies that we are reading for class, they all have a way to resolve the conflict in the case studies, like all these hypothetical situations. And what about when there's no possible resolution? What happens when you're never going to agree? And he just kind of laughed and said, thanks for being in the class. Like, what do you do with that? What do you do with the anger, with the frustration that comes from being in this constant state of impasse, this constant state of unresolution? And that's an ongoing question that I've been asking myself. In the meantime, right, as we're working on how to exist in that kind of liminal, suspended space, the questions we need to ask ourselves is this: can we stay in relationship with people even if we never disagree, if we can never agree? Can we stay in a relationship with people even if we're never able to agree? And if so, how can we make the relationship stronger and more resilient so it can handle that conflict, that disagreement, and not break? How can we make it so that disagreement works on our behalf and is healthy for us versus unhealthy for us? And in some cases, our commitment to our beliefs might be stronger than the commitment to certain relationships. And that's what we're seeing a lot of times now when people are experiencing social death or social shunning, right? Unfriending on Facebook might seem like an innocuous kind of funny thing, but it's actually, that's a lost connection. That's a type of social death. And some folks are feeling like, in some cases, that is a necessary measure to communicate the strength of their commitment to their beliefs. And I think sometimes that's a valid option. Sometimes people are espousing ideas that are so dangerous that they might only respond to someone cutting them out of their life, right? But I think we also need to resist this idea that that suffering itself is going to help us. And I can say a lot more about that after this conversation. But for the most part, if we can find shared values, can we hang on to that even if we disagree about the way that those values are realized? If I want America to be a strong country and my extremely conservative friend wants America to be a strong country, we have the same value ultimately, right? We have the same dream, the same wish. We might have extremely different versions of how to get there, but to remind ourselves of, okay, we ultimately do want the same thing. We ultimately do, and it's really crazy that we want the same thing, but that is the truth, right? And maybe that can help us not to demonize each other, and to ask ourselves at the end of the day, what keeps us in community with each other? What keeps us in community? What is the fabric of our society that's keeping us knit together? And this question, I think, is more apropos than almost anything I've talked about tonight, because a lot of us feel that fabric tearing apart beneath us, right? We feel that those cracks, the crumbling happening, and it's there's a lot of grief in that process, right? So what I come back to is that the strength of our society is made up of these individual interactions, the day-to-day one-on-one conversations that we all as a people have together. We are really no more healthy as a nation than those individual conversations. So if we can keep those individual conversations, we are making a contribution to the whole. To sum this up, this is the last slide, and then I'd love to get into some conversation. There are really two approaches to conflict that I've been working with, right? The traditional approach to conflict is the resolution. Conflict is bad. The other side is my enemy. We should just force ourselves to agree and get along, right? We got to find a solution and solve. We got to fix the conflict. We should end the conflict. Conflict's making me uncomfortable, so end the bad feelings. One person deserves to win, and success means moving on no matter what the consequence. Let me offer that that's an unhealthy approach to disagreement. A healthier approach to disagreement is what I and many other scholars call conflict transformation. And this phrase was coined by a professor at Notre Dame named John Paul Lederach. And he offers that conflict transformation is when we start to see conflict as an opportunity to learn and grow. The other side is not my enemy. They're my conversation partner, my fellow human. We should collaborate and create healthier ways of interacting instead of forcing ourselves to agree. Our highest priority should be building each other up, building strong relationships, creating trust, not fixing it, right? Relationship, not resolution. It sounds weird, but a lot of times when we focus on relationship, these resolutions will present themselves and iron themselves out. We have to make sure the relationship is strong before anything else, right? Instead of just trying to end conflict, we should identify and disarm the destructing underlying causes of conflict and build something better so this doesn't happen again in the future. Understanding it's okay to be uncomfortable and anxious, and not letting those feelings rule us, because the long-term goals mean that working through hard feelings is worth it. It's worth it to be uncomfortable for you, this person that I'm in community with. Understanding that ambiguity is a sign of paradox. There are many voices deserving to be heard, and there are a lot of different approaches to truth, right? Not all. Sometimes we have to draw a line in the sand, but truth is more varied and complicated than I think a lot of us want to realize. And then finally, understanding that success means in conflict, not just moving on, not just fixing it and moving on and being done with it, but understanding that we're trying to create new eyes for this. We're trying to create a collaborative plan of action so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. That's all I have for this conversation, but I'd love to talk more in discussion with you all. This is my book, Brave Talk. You can check it out wherever books are sold. I've also created a free conversation game that I have on my website, Brave Talk Project. It's called Basecamp. And it's actually a conversation process that you can go through with groups of people that actually stages difficult conversations and creates a structure, a brave space, if you will. and it's got a metaphor going up a mountain, you know, building a house together. It's got all these kind of nice word pictures that help groups kind of any age navigate a difficult conversation if people are struggling to find structure. Because a lot of times, you know, we never learn these skills, you know. We're just kind of thrown into the ring and say, just figure it out. And we watch movies. We try to figure out how to deal with conflict from movies or from just our gut instincts. But I'm ever more convinced that these skills are skills that we all deserve to learn, because we all deal with conflict. And I wonder what the world would be like if we could create, if healthy disagreement was the norm. I wonder what our world, what our country would look like, what our communities would look like, what our families would look like if this was a skill set that everyone could learn. So thank you for being part of this journey with me. And I would love to hear from you in this presentation, or in any of your thoughts or questions or experiences that have come up. What to you speaks the loudest? What strikes you the most? Or if there's anything that you wish I would have talked about, I'd love to hear more from you, what you think.
Hey, Mel.
Yeah.
It's Hall. Question on how you have I've really struggled with this, on how you have a constructive conversation with someone who, I could call it a very different worldview, because it sounds like I'm criticizing when I say they live in an alternate reality, but for whatever reason, it's an alternate reality. I guess that's the best way I can describe. So I don't know, and I struggle that my trust isn't there. You know, you don't want to just condemn and write people off, but I struggle to have a constructive conversation if that's the case.
Yeah,
Really.
I definitely hear you in that. Yeah, I think for me, it's important, and I'd love to hear from other people how they navigate that. But for me, it's important to remember that we have extremely polarizing media, that the media that folks consume, if they're of a liberal persuasion, is presenting an alternate view of reality than the media that other folks are consuming of different persuasions, right? And I think for me, it's been helpful to try to get as much as I can out of my media bubble, as angering as that makes me, as hard as that is, to understand at least what media my opponents are consuming, and to try to meet them where they are. There's a phrase that comes out of activism called moving the needle, right, on social justice issues. And I think that's another helpful thing. I'm not going to change someone's mind in a day or in a week or maybe in a lifetime. But if I can try to move the needle and get them closer to understanding my conception of justice, then maybe I've done something positive. But it's extremely frustrating if someone resists common sense, resists sense, right? Resists source. And we're in an age of a death of the expert, where people are not trusting experts and trusting intellectuals, right? We're in an anti-intellectual sentiment. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, no, this is helpful. I mean, the media comment is right on target, because my hesitation is, no, who am I to say my reality is the correct one? I mean, why is my truth the only truth, if you will? But sometimes I'm conversing with someone and they just, their facts are just plain wrong, whether it's conspiracy theories or, I guess I could use the example of ballot fraud, right? Because we've seen that's proved not to be the case. We had a free and fair election, there've been 60 court cases, on and on and on. That's just one example. And I don't want to be, I don't want to be in this high and mighty mode where, listen to me, I know I've got all the answers. That's a closed off mind. But it's just frustrating for me, because it seems like it's a conversational loop that, I'd like to move the needle, and like to each learn from each other, but it's just a loop and it really doesn't go anywhere. And the conversants, we just end up frustrated. So I don't know. I hate to give up.
Yeah.
be people I do want to have a relationship with, but yeah, the media comment is that's something for me to chew on, because whether liberal and progressive or conservative, I mean, your point is that there are media bubbles created for each of those. For each of those, is that what you're saying?
I am, and I have to admit, this week alone, I shared 2 different things on Facebook that I got fact checked on, and that was irresponsible of me. That's my leftist bubble. I mean, just because something sounds true or seems true doesn't make it true. And I think I think one of the biggest things we can do as American citizens right now is just fact check ourselves, right? But the problem is, though, that this anti-media sentiment has been drummed up to such a degree that if I cite sources, then someone I'm speaking to might say those aren't even legitimate sources. Like, I don't trust AP News, which to me is outlandish.
Yeah.
But where do you go from there? Gosh, if you can figure that out. I think what I would do in that conversation, if I was in that conversation, I'd say, okay, what news sources do you trust? And if I found you something from that news source, like if you do trust PolitiFact, like independent fact checker organization, if you do trust Snopes, right? Trying to establish a common ground ahead of time and saying, what do you trust, right? What sources will you accept? And then trying to use that, I guess, would be one option, one way to go. But I think it's a bigger conversation that you're pointing to. 10 years ago, when I was in the academy, we were talking a lot about postmodernism and how truth is relative, and you can see truth from many angles, right? But now, in the world of alternative facts, experts are calling this a post-truth mentality, that you can really construct your own epistemology, your own way of thinking. You can construct your own reality, literally, and just believe whatever you want to believe because it sounds true to you, and that's right and correct. And so this, to me, as a scholar, as an academic, that is terrifying, that we're entering an age of post-truth, and not to scare anyone, but this is where we're headed. We're heading into an age of technology where people can create deep fakes, create video footage that looks very much real because the CGI is that good, and make it sound like political leaders are saying things that they don't say, making actual video of their face talking and their voice talking, making it sound exactly like they've said something. So fact checking is going to be increasingly more important in an age of deep fakes, when people think that truth is so relative that it can't even be known. And to your point, Hall, I was talking to someone this week who said, well, can we even know what truth is? Can we even trust the courts? I said, well, if we can't trust our courts, then our society has completely failed. Like, at what point do you say, there has to be someone that you can trust, because this anti-media sentiment has gotten so bad. Like, and I think I would go back to saying, like, okay, maybe you don't like CNN, but you can still listen to CNN and understand that it has a bias. You don't have to accept everything it says all the time, but to just shut it out and say you're not even going to hear it. That's where I think you enter territory where groups of people can start to be manipulated if they're only listened to one source of information all the time. And that goes for right or left, right? Not having diversity of ideas is not safe or healthy for us. So I think it is important to listen to oppositional media and to see, and understanding that they have biases that you're not going to believe with. I might not like Fox News. I might see the bias that they have, but I still would like to, I'm interested to hear their perspective, and if they see something different than what I've been fed in my media bubble. And it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to do that. But I think it's important at least to have a handle on what folks in my life are being taught.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Is it?
No, it really is. Yeah. And of course, I look at your posts, and I'm, a dedicated follower. Don't always reply, but maybe the lesson there is to sometimes it pays to wait. It's always pays to listen, right? Rather than just jump in. Mm-hmm. But it may pay to wait and gather some additional facts and put yourself in learning mode and not jump to conclusions. And I could go on and frame it many different ways, but that's probably a good premise because we have such height, and I know I have just heightened anger, and that
Yeah.
can color my ability, maybe others to think reasonably about things. So.
And all of that said, there is a time and a place to stand up and say, truth
Yeah.
can flex, truth can be somewhat relative, but it cannot bend that far before you're starting to be violent against the truth itself. You cannot decide that a lie is the truth and that's just your opinion. You can't do that, right? You have to take a stand, and I think that's where again, disagreement can be healthy in the sense of speaking truth to power. That the power of protest, the power of fighting for what you know to be right, protecting facts, right? Saying no, we're not going to do alternative facts. There's facts and there's not facts. Alternative facts is not a thing, And that might sound very partisan for me to say, but
Well, and it's pretty hard, and I'm hogging the conversation. This is the last thing I'll say, but it's pretty hard to equivocate and see both sides to what has happened, to the insurrection in the Capitol. I mean, I don't have patience with people who are, stark example is that, there was an Antifa element there. No, there wasn't, so some things do seem to be pretty black and white, and to your point, take a stand.
There's going to be a point where people will believe what they want to believe, and unfortunately at that point there's no bringing someone back. That you can show them all the evidence in the world and they don't want to believe it, so they won't. And that has been cultivated by our national leaders, and it's very, very dangerous to our society. So I hope we can come back from this. I hope we can. Right?
Hope so too.
Yeah. All to say, screaming at that person will probably not help the situation, right? I know it's so difficult to continue to be patient, to continue to be an educator, but I don't see any other way to do it. I don't see any other way that could be rhetorically effective or, emotionally or psychologically effective than, continuing to communicate.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, comments from anyone else? Questions? Anything that jumped out to you about this?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Hey, thank you for having this. So I really appreciated your piece. As you were just talking now, I was just thinking about how much willpower it takes to be patient in the moment. And I think that's the biggest struggle that I'm coming to terms with, is sort of setting my expectations in the moment and realizing this is a moot point. Like, I'm not going to change this person. I'm not going to, so what's the point of fighting? And it might be best if I just listen and receive their point of view and understand and be patient and just sit with that. And I think that's the hardest part, is sitting with it and fighting the urge to change somebody's opinion immediately. And maybe then that's not, maybe they're not a worthy opponent. You realizing in that moment that, they're not worth my emotional space. They're not worth my, the emotional labor, because, maybe they don't even respect me and how they're speaking to me now. So I think, I like how you sort of dissected this idea of, picking your battles, but it's deeper than that. It's very cliche and trite, but there's so many layers to that I don't think we take time to process. And, we say pick your battles, but it really does affect how we approach conversations and how we, I don't know. I think then there's this lasting emotional imprint on us. Like, did we accomplish what we set out to do, or are we even more frustrated in the end because we didn't move the needle and they didn't see us for what we were, coming to them for? So I think really, like, to Holly's point and to what you were saying earlier, Melody, just pausing before engaging, I think is really key. And I think spending more time with that will help me certainly. And, the other thing that resonated with me was I liked your concept of introducing conflict transformation rather than this, as opposed to conflict resolution. I just think growing up, we hear that phrase, conflict resolution. And so we have this natural tendency to say it's done and we're moving on. And it's not taking into account the residual effects and the residual emotions that are still there that need care. So I appreciated you introducing that. So thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't think it's cliche to say pick your battles. And I think to your point, I think that the art of this for me comes into what can I do and say and model that will invite someone to transform themselves from an unworthy opponent to a worthy opponent. I've had conversations with folks who come at me with guns blazing and just trying to respond to them in a way that is invitational and say, hey, we don't have to be antagonistic here. Will you please see me? Because I'm going to take the time to see you. Will you please respect me? And that doesn't always happen, right? But just putting the invitation out there and giving someone the opportunity to go, oh, oh, we can just have a conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
That for me, again, is the art of this. And I'm always working on that for myself and my own interactions. And for me, it comes down to a lot, just reiterating, thank you for having this conversation with me. Thank you for engaging me. Thank you for taking the time. Is that kind of spirit of gratitude? Although I can understand in some situations that would feel like a little bit, what do I say, slovenly, especially when people have been fighting for their rights for so many years. And they're constantly asking to be seen by the majority or by the oppressor class. So, I'm constantly trying to balance that like decolonial mindset for myself. But yeah, I think that invitation for me, that word invitation just keeps resonating. How can I be invitational? How can I create spaces, not just respond, not just react, but create spaces actively where these conversations can happen?
I do have a question. If you're say you're in a hot seat with somebody that you're not ready to engage with, you've decided this is not the time or the place, or this isn't the power structure, it's not appropriate for me to have this conversation. Like, can you give examples of maybe phrases to sort of stop the conversation, or to just respectfully decline to engage? I don't know, like, how to, like, I think in those moments we sort of lose ourselves and forget any training, and it just sort of goes out the door. I don't know if you have any key go-to phrases that you use.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I go back to the I speak. I'm feeling too overwhelmed right now to talk about this. I'm feeling very angry right now about this, and I need to stop talking about it now, or I need to take a break. That's all legitimate. It's very hard for someone to argue out of that. No, you don't need to take a break, right? So communicating I think it can be a really great service to someone else to communicate with them. Hey, I'm really mad right now. I'm really angry, and I'm not in a place to be talking about this with you. Sometimes you can say, hey, how about we set up a time tomorrow to talk about it when I've had a chance to cool off, right? You can make a plan for future action. But it's perfectly legitimate to walk away. You never have to be part of these conversations if you don't want to. And I think that free will, that choice has to be present, right? Because if someone's forcing you to talk to them, or you're forcing yourself to talk to them, that's going to come across and add to the antagonism and the stress of the moment. So I think it's really important to listen to yourself. If your body or your mind is saying, or your heart is saying, don't do this, you're not ready for this, you're being triggered, you're going to lose your control, absolutely walk away. That's completely legitimate.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions or musings or anything else as we wrap up here? thank you for being part of this conversation, everyone. I really appreciate it. Please stay in touch with me. Social media, email. We'll have future. Oh, thank you, Crystal. We'll have future workshops as well. Check out the Basecamp conversation game on my website, Brave Talk Project. Check out the book. And I look forward to staying in touch with you all. And best of luck in your difficult conversations and disagreements.
Thanks, Mel.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye.
have a wonderful night.
Take care,
Bye.
everybody.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.